Hi everyone, it's time for another episode of RFA Insider.
That was Amy and I'm Eugene, and today on RFA Insider, it's Pandemonium!
That's right, we're airing a special audio documentary about pandas in the National Zoo here in Washington, D.C.
And then after that on Podcast Free Asia, we'll talk a little bit about North Korean troops dispatched to Russia with clips from a discussion hosted by RFA Korean.
And then on the rundown, we've got two stories, a double feature from China.
All of that and more awaits. RFA Insider starts right now.
靚生乜女話你？咪嚟提，tập trung vào chủ đề。딴소리하지 마。어디？
This is Eugene Huang with RFA Insider, and we're here at the National Zoo today because the pandas are coming. But when are they coming? Let's find out. I guess horizontally is fine.
If you passed by the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. in late September, you'd have seen giant signs advertising to the world that the pandas are coming. The zoo had been without pandas after the last trio, Mei Xiang, Tian Tian, and their 3-year-old U.S.-born son, Xiao Qiji, were sent back to China at the end of 2023.
Unlike some people who are only ever seeing them just once and for a short period of time, I've been watching these guys for 52 years. So it'll be sad to see them go. It's been a tremendous amount of pleasure and fun watching both Ling Ling and Xing Xing grow up.
That was a clip from an RFA report that sought answers from the zoo representatives and the Chinese embassy in D.C. as to why the pandas had to be sent back, or why the panda lease agreement couldn't be renewed. After all, Mei Xiang and Tian Tian had arrived in the year 2000 on a 10-year agreement, which had been renewed for 5 years in 2010, and another 5 in 2015, and another 3 in 2020. Both parties had remained silent on the matter as to why the agreement could not be renewed, and it appeared to some that China was lashing out. In fact, there seems to be a prevalent idea among observers that deepening tensions between China and the US had caused China to recall the pandas.
This spot is the very spot. Eugene and I visited the zoo on a weekday afternoon in the lull between two heavy rainstorms. Needless to say, it was like a ghost town. If you're ever here on the weekend, it's jam-packed with screaming kids hopped up on high-fructose corn syrup, tired parents making the best of a situation, and new couples secretly wishing they had chosen a better date spot. Oh, and animal lovers too. On this gloomy, overcast day, we had scheduled an interview with the zoo's director, Brandie Smith, to talk about panda diplomacy, conservation, and when we could expect some new pandas in Washington. We had a little time before our interview, so we thought we'd take in the exhibits and talk to a few zoogoers. Even though the zoo seemed completely deserted, there were a few people here and there. Astonishingly, some of them were not even aware that the pandas were gone.
Okay, I'm here with
Colby
and
Amanda.
Okay, and so you were here at the National Zoo and you did not see any pandas today. How do you feel about that?
I was really excited to see them. So, I guess a little disappointed, but they are coming back.
How about you?
I didn't want to say I came here for the pandas, but I did come here for the pandas.
All right, I'm here with
Darren.
Okay, and we're at the giant panda exhibit. Where are the pandas today?
I think they down there.
You think they're down there?
Uh-huh.
Okay, well actually there are no pandas in the zoo today.
Yeah, no, but the pandas right
not out.
They're not even here.
Yeah, but they've been gone since 2023. They're gonna come sooner or later. Yeah, later this year.
Yeah, why there's no pandas?
Because
They're going extinct.
no, they're not going extinct. Just they had to go back to China.
Fortunately, pandas are not extinct, though they used to be endangered. But thanks to efforts by institutions like the China Wildlife Conservation Association and their partners all over the globe, including at the Smithsonian National Zoo in D.C., the panda's conservation status was officially upgraded from endangered to vulnerable in 2016. In 2021, Chinese officials announced that the giant panda was no longer endangered in the wild. So pandas are making a comeback.
Okay, so we're here at the giant panda exhibit with
Paula DeAngelis.
All right, so we're at the giant panda exhibit, and as you can see, there are no pandas here. Do you know why that is?
Yes, I was told that the pandas have been recalled back to China in all the zoos by the concierge at my hotel.
Colby, who we talked to earlier, said something similar.
Okay, so were you not aware that they weren't here?
I wasn't. I did hear on the news that China was taking them all back. So It kind of escaped me.
But when asked why China was taking them back, the zoo-goers seemed puzzled.
Why they had to go back to China?
I understand. China recalled them from every zoo.
Now, when you said that China was trying to take them all back, why do you think they might be doing that?
I don't know if it's correct. I heard that they own all the pandas.
Could it really be because of geopolitical tension that China's taking them back?
Could be. Yeah.
I'd like to think not. I'd like to think it's for the health of the panda, but who knows?
All right, thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
So where does this idea that China is recalling all the pandas come from? That's good. Paula talked about how the hotel concierge had told her about it, and Colby had said that he had heard it on the news.
Giant pandas. They're arguably China's most famous and cutest export.
These animals are more than just mascots for China. They're also tools in China's global diplomatic strategy.
Pandas have through the years become envoys of friendship. They have also been used to show Chinese anger.
The pandas aren't just pandas. They're diplomats. You're friendly to China, you get a panda. You criticize China, you get no pandas.
At its peak, there were 15 pandas at U.S. zoos, but after today, there will be just 4 left in the country.
At times, it seems like China has used pandas as a reward, for, other countries if they feel that they have been useful strategic partners, etc.
That's Lizelada Odgaard, a non-resident senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. In her work, she focuses on U.S.-China-Europe relations, and she's a professor at the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies. I was able to catch her for a quick online meeting as she was riding public transit.
And maybe not given pandas to countries that have not been on such good behavior, such as Norway giving the Nobel Peace Prize to a China-critical, domestic, regime-critical person.
Odgaard is referring to the late Liu Xiaobo, a Chinese dissident who was awarded the 2010 Nobel Peace Prize for his long and nonviolent struggle for fundamental human rights in China, in a decision that infuriated Beijing. During the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony in Oslo, he was represented by an empty chair because he was incarcerated in China at the time. Shortly after Liu became a Nobel laureate, 2 pandas that had been promised to a zoo in Norway were instead sent to Edinburgh, Scotland.
One last thing. So you mentioned that sometimes pandas are quote-unquote a reward. I mean, is that enough of a reward to do what China wants?
No, I don't think so. Because China is a competitor of the West. And so there are other things that are more important. And pandas is not enough of a reward to shift a country's opinion, which is also why, it's not such an efficient card.
There's no doubt that pandas are cute and cuddly and certainly popular among animal lovers. But according to Odgaard, a panda alone is not enough to be a reward, and recalling the panda is not much of an actual punishment. Let's re-examine what happened after Liu won the Nobel Prize. After Liu became the first PRC citizen to win a Nobel Prize, Beijing cut off trade ties with Norway, including access to its lucrative seafood market, with its high demand for Norwegian salmon. Norway had up to that point supplied almost all of the imported salmon to China, so Beijing started looking elsewhere to buy the feisty North Sea fish, and inked a trade deal with Scotland instead. It therefore might seem to observers that the increased trade was the reward for Scotland, and the decreased trade was punishment for Norway. The pandas, under this assumption, would be little more than symbolic. So are the pandas then just a symbol of the health of a relationship between 2 countries? Let's take a look backward at the history of China's panda diplomacy with the United States.
It all starts in the 1970s. No. I said the 1970s. All right, that's better. While having dinner during a state visit to Beijing, China in February 1972, First Lady Pat Nixon told Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai how she was fond of pandas. Following that first state visit, the premier presented the American people with 2 pandas as a gesture of goodwill. In return, President Nixon presented the people of China with...
Bald eagles?
2 musk oxen.
Oh.
Ling Ling and Xing Xing arrived at the National Zoo that April to much fanfare.
On behalf of the people of the United States, I am pleased to be here and accept the precious gift of the pandas from the government of the People's Republic of China. And I think pandemonium is going to break out right here at the zoo. Thank you very much.
The pandas were not sent simply for passerby to patiently peruse. Indeed, part of their purpose would be panda proliferation. The pair would preferably be prolific, providing panda pups aplenty. What is this? Why are you putting so many P words next to each other for me to read?
Sorry.
So after the pandas arrived, everyone was hoping that they would have babies, but Ling Ling and Xing Xing did not have the hots for each other. So baby pandas would not be around to pry people's eyes away from Saturday Night Fever, Star Wars, The Brady Bunch, and the death of disco.
It wasn't until the totally radical 1980s that the panda pair mated for the first time. In 1983, Ling Ling gave birth to a panda cub, but sadly it died only after a few hours due to pneumonia. Ling Ling and Xing Xing would become parents 4 more times between 1984 and 1989, including a pair of twins in 1987. But all of the cubs died shortly after birth. For some reason, birthing pandas in captivity wasn't working.
In 1989, the whole world had its eyes on China. After months of protests in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, the government declared martial law and sent troops to take the square in what is now referred to as the Tiananmen Square Massacre.
After hours of shooting and facing a line of troops, the crowd is still here. They're shouting, "Stop the killing and down with the government."
The event would be a blemish on China's international image, which the pandas had up to this point helped clean up.
And as the totally tubular 80s gave way to the whatever 90s, pandas were still an attraction at the National Zoo. But in 1992, sadly, Ling Ling died of heart failure at age 23. Xing Xing would live another 7 years until age-related diseases got the better of him, and he was euthanized in 1999. The first panda pair had been given as a gift from China to the United States, and for the first time in 27 years, the panda enclosure at the National Zoo sat empty.
But then came the turn of the millennium, and the world did not succumb to the Y2K bug, and things were on the up and up. In December, the zoo got a second pair of pandas, Meishang and Tiantian. This time, the pandas were only alone, and the zoo would have to pay a fee of 10 million over 10 years. But breeding for the second pair was similarly challenging. Although they tried naturally and artificially, it wasn't until 2005 that the couple gave birth to the zoo's first surviving panda cub, Tai-san. Tai-san would live at the zoo for the next 5 years, heading back to China in 2010. The zoo came to an agreement to extend their lease on Meishang and Tiantian for another 5 years.
As the aughts turned into the teens, Meishang and Tiantian would welcome several more cubs. One was born in 2012 but died only a few days later. In 2013, Meishang gave birth to Bao Bao, the zoo's second surviving panda. But a second cub was stillborn about a day later. In 2015, 2 more cubs were born, with the smaller of the 2 dying. The surviving one was named by First Lady Michelle Obama and the First Lady of the People's Republic of China. They called him Bei Bei. If you combine the 2's names, you'll get Bao Bei, a term of endearment meaning precious, treasure. A new agreement was signed to keep the pandas in DC until 2020.
In 2017, Bao Bao departed for China, and in 2019, Bei Bei left as well. Around the time that Bei Bei was to be sent back, Roya Shadravan was going to the National Zoo on a daily basis.
My name is Roya Shadravan, and I'm the director of video in our multimedia group here at RFA back in 2016 because I had had a brain tumor and I just needed a break from the news. So me myself and my partner, we decided to do something crazy, and we opened a food truck. And we sold dumplings on our food truck. My wife is actually from Hong Kong. And so, yeah, we ran a food truck for a few years, and it was in the D.C. area. And we got this random call from the D.C. National Zoo about maybe bringing our food truck into the zoo. And the reason why they called us is there's only 2 dumpling food trucks, at that time at least, in the D.C. area. It was us, Mulan Dumpling, or this other food truck called Yumpling. And the guy who was organizing this, he had a son who was maybe 8 years old or around that age. And his son had just seen this movie, Kung Fu Panda. And since this zoo is known, I mean, the main draw at the DC National Zoo is the pandas. They thought dumplings and pandas, because in the movie, you know, the main character, the main panda family, they make dumplings. And so they just thought it was a good match. So that's how we got selected to go into the zoo. You know, we were stationed in the zoo. Our food truck never moved. It was almost like having a brick and mortar. So we were there working zoo hours.
Around the time that Bebe was being sent back, was there like any special event for that you witnessed?
Well, what I did notice first, there were a lot of media reports that went out about her going back to China. And what I noticed was this influx of panda enthusiasts in the zoo. I mean, people were coming from everywhere. I mean, people come anyway, but there was a huge growth in numbers of people arriving at the zoo. And our sales went up too, because there is this connection, and it's so strange, but there's a connection between pandas and dumplings. Like, people just, a lot of kids too. It's it's amazing how this one film has changed the whole trajectory of what kids, it's not just chicken nuggets anymore. It's dumplings. So. Okay.
Now, you said you did have relationships with the zoo staff. Was there any feeling of, sadness or I guess kind of feeling brokenhearted that they had to send a panda that was born in the zoo and raised there for, I guess, 3 or 4 years, and then they just have to send it back?
Oh yeah. There was. I mean, these people, they spend so many hours with these bears, and it's almost like they're children, It's like saying goodbye. It's like becoming an empty nester, for parents. I'm assuming. I mean, there is a definitely emotional attachment.
And then the pandemic happened. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. 2020 rolled around, and Mei Xiang gave birth to a 4th surviving cub, which they named Xiao Qiji. Xiao Qiji was special in that he was the first to be born outside of China, conceived only with frozen thawed male gametes. But just like Taishan, Bao Bao, and Bei Bei before him, people knew that Xiao Qiji would also have to leave for China in just a few short years. So why is that? How come every time a new panda cub is born at the zoo, China can still claim that it belongs to them? That's because unlike Ling Ling and Xing Xing, Mei Xiang and Tian Tian were not gifts. They were on loan. As part of the loan agreement, China retains ownership of all the pandas and their offspring, meaning that any cubs that are born and survive childhood must be sent back to China eventually.
Well, in 2022, Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina wanted to try and keep all the pandas born in the U.S. Beijing was preparing to host the 2022 Winter Olympics, and it seemed to her that the world was turning a blind eye to China's human rights abuses. So she introduced a bill that would keep pandas born in the United States from being sent back to China. She called it the Promoting Animal Naturalization and Democracy Act. or Panda for short.
China claims all pandas the world over belong to China, and they charge zoos $500,000 per panda per year for the privilege of loaning these gentle creatures to us. Ultimately, every last panda must be returned to China, property of the Chinese Communist government. Every year, millions of Americans enjoy these pandas, not knowing the sinister plot behind their all too brief stay here. We should not fund China's panda propaganda campaign. In the words of Sun Tzu, begin by seizing something which your opponent holds dear, and then he will be amenable to your will. Let's get serious with our diplomacy and hit China where it hurts. Give freedom to the pandas and allow them to stay here in the United States.
But the act did not pass, and the pandas at the National Zoo returned to China at the end of 2023.
So we have documented how pandas are at least perceived to be political tools that China is using to punish or reward Western countries. What about in China's neighboring countries? How are the pandas perceived there? We talked to a few people from within RFA to gauge their perspectives on the matter.
Hi, I'm Soyoung Kim. I'm a reporter at Korean service, RFA. Yeah, so Fubao is the first giant panda born in South Korea, July 2020, through the natural breeding. That's why he is very special. And he was born and raised at Everland, which is one of the largest amusement park in South Korea. Mm-hmm. As you know, Fubao was loved so much by South Koreans, not only because he's cute and, but also he's zookeeper. I'll just call him Mr. Kang. And then, usually media, their relationship and then friendship, from the baby and then until leaving, and then it was exposed in the media so much. That's why people love Fubao so much, more than other just pandas or other animals. And then when he was sent and then back to China, and then I think South Korean fans keep an eye on pay attention if he's doing well, and then they saw some videos, I guess, leaked or recorded in China. Mm-hmm. And then, I think people say he doesn't seem fine and he doesn't eat well, or, just guessing, right? And I think there's no actual footage of he was being abused. My opinion is since South Koreans loved him so much, of course, they are very concerned about Fubao's well-being after his sent to China. And then maybe, it's not my opinion, but maybe Chinese governments can be a little not 100% transparent about things. Sometimes, they don't reveal everything. And then maybe that's why, when South Korean netizens saw some videos, maybe some skeptical, videos, maybe they think that, what about Fubao is not treated well, because he was loved so much in Korea and by Mr. Kang. And then actually Mr. Kang visited China to see Fubao in person. And then what he said is, yes, he seems, Fubao maybe seems a little uncomfortable because he's just transferred from South Korea to new environment. So
you're saying that Mr. Kang went there and he wanted to kind of reassure the
right. I think he wanted to make sure that he's doing well because he was almost like a father for Fubao. And then I think his words can kind of comfort the South Koreans, you know?
Or diffuse the situation with the somewhat angry.
Right. Otherwise, all these rumors and speculations can just circulate, right? Without any evidence or clear confirmation.
Okay.
By anything.
I'm Jane Tang. I'm a journalist here with the investigative unit. In 2008, China gave Taiwan a pair of panda. Their name are Tuan Tuan, Yuan Yuan, but Tuan Yuan together, it means reunion. Implication of unification, which means just we are all family and China, Taiwan, we're all big family and we'll be united one day.
Why is it controversial that the panda's names mean reunification?
Well, because China believes Taiwan is part of Greater China, and Taiwan need to go back to the motherland one day.
Okay.
So before Taiwan accept in 2008, there's already a long debate about whether or not to accept the panda, especially given the name was the symbol of unified. But in 2008, a more pro-PRC government in Taiwan was in office, and it was like a time of cross-strait relation is speeding up. So that's how the whole panda theme came. People at that time was excited because, it's panda. And I remember I was still in school. Same thing happened in Taiwan like what happened in DC. We have a special panda zoo, a lot of special panda-related product, and people are just excited. Look at it. They're just cute. And people just excited that, we finally have this new star animal taking over the zoo.
And I understand now that one of those pandas has died. Mm-hmm. And so they had children there, and there are 3 left, right?
Yes, they have 2 children. Now, the dad has unfortunately passed away in 2022. Mm-hmm. At that time, people were kind of also mourning about the cross-strait relation going downward. But yeah, there's only 3 left.
Okay. Are there any efforts to maybe replace the father with perhaps a different male panda?
That's the latest political drama because there's only 3 female panda in Taipei now. I believe last year there's some breeding discussion, but China didn't agree that Taiwan panda in Taiwan to participate. And these 2 young panda is entering the age they can have babies.
Okay.
Well, because the tension between Taiwan and China in the last, I would say, 8 years or so, especially since 2000, there's no really talk between China and Taiwan, and same as the panda, nothing really get done, and they don't really, because of the sour of the political climate between Taiwan and China. These poor little panda doesn't get the right to get married or have kids.
When Mei Xiang, Tiantian, and Xiao Qiji departed the National Zoo for China on November 8, 2023, the press about the future of the panda program was mostly doom and gloom, highlighting that after their departure, only 4 pandas, the ones in Atlanta, Georgia, would remain in the U.S. Here were some of the headlines from U.S. media at the time. Associated Press.
National Zoo's giant pandas fly home amid uncertainty about future panda exchanges.
Voice of America.
China takes back Washington's pandas amid frosty diplomacy.
New York Times.
The end of panda diplomacy?
NBCnews.com.
With return of 3 pandas to China, US could soon have none.
But just a week later, China's President Xi Jinping announced during a summit with President Biden in California that a new round of panda loans would be offered to the National Zoo in Washington and other US zoos.
I was told that many American people, especially children, were really reluctant to say goodbye to the pandas and went to the zoo to see them off. Pandas have long been envoys of friendship between the Chinese and American peoples. We are ready to continue our cooperation with the United States on panda conservation and do our best so as to deepen friendly ties between our peoples.
And then shortly after Xi broke the news, the White House did as well.
It's official! The pandas are coming back to D.C.
For more than 50 years, the zoo's pandas have brought joy to everyone who has seen them and are one of our biggest conservation success stories.
That's Brandie Smith, the director of the National Zoo, rubbing elbows with Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady of the United States. And that's who Amy and I wanted to talk to when we went to the zoo back in September. If anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was her.
咪嚟題，tập中個主題。
딴소리하지 마. Offbeat.
All right, so today on RFA Insider, we're going offbeat with Brandie Smith, the director of the Smithsonian National Zoo in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the podcast, Director Smith.
Thanks for having me.
So it's a pleasure to be here in your office. Can you tell us about the history of the Panda program here in the National Zoo?
We just recently celebrated 50 years of giant pandas at the National Zoo. They came here in 1972.
We've already gone over that, so let's fast forward a bit until we get to the part where she talks about diplomacy.
His wife
was instrumental in bringing
So how much does geopolitics really play into whether or not a zoo receives pandas?
So it's a great question, but I can only really speak to my experience as a zoo director. And I have to say, we have had a 50-year relationship with our panda colleagues in China, and we've worked together very closely to work on the conservation of the species, understanding more about it, saving the species and its habitat in the wild. So that's essentially been how we've perceived the program, and everything that we've done, pandas arriving here, pandas returning China, have been part of our careful conversations, negotiations based upon these longstanding relationships and successful conservation.
Okay, so what's your reaction to news stories that seem to try to say, well, it's because, the U.S. and China are having rocky relations, and that's why they're recalling all the pandas?
So I always think, it's funny, I think it's a compliment to the Panda program, because the reality is people see this program between, pandas between the National Zoo, Smithsonian's National Zoo, and, pandas in China, and they look at how successful it is, how collaborative it is, and I think that people want to layer over the kind of geopolitical question, because how does this work? How do you do it? How do you succeed? So I almost take it as a compliment that people think there are larger machinations at work and that this program is part of it. But the reality is that everything we have done has been planned, and it has been the focus of saving a species. So I can say this, I think the one example that most people were concerned over was when we returned our pandas to China, when we returned Mei, Shang, and Tian to China. And what I can say is the agreement that we made actually started 3 years ago, and it was a long process of conversations about what was best for the pandas. COVID was happening at that time, so it was also working around making sure that we could return the pandas at a time when it was safe to transport them. And then there are also permits that are involved, so we're required to get permits from our government that can take a year or more to achieve. So a lot of people they look at the news of that day and think it impacts the pandas, but the reality is the return of those giant pandas was 3 years in the making.
So, from what Director Smith was saying, it seems it would be impossible for China to quickly call pandas back on a whim based on a diplomatic summit that didn't go well or a trade disagreement. The agreement to send back Mei Shang, Tian, and Xiao Qiji was in place in 2020, so any political friction that might have been in play in 2023 was not a factor in this decision.
And Director Smith repeatedly stressed that conservation was the focus of the program. We can infer then that moving around pandas on a whim is probably not the best thing to do for conservation. But we did want to know when the pandas would be there for us to see at the zoo. After all, they had signs advertising their arrival, but no word on when they would arrive. All right, I know I said I wasn't going to ask you, but can you give us a little hint as to when they might actually be?
For context, our office has been busy theorizing, and our boss was like, it's going to be October because they'll have to change the signs for the Halloween event.
If you guys want to do an internal pool and then afterwards you can say, whoever gets the date the closest, that's fine. But it is about safety and security, not just for the pandas, but for the people who are going to be with them during the transport. As you can imagine, we are moving 2 large carnivores halfway across the world, and there is no margin for error. So we need to make sure that it's all done well.
Yeah, we wouldn't want any pandemonium breaking place.
No, not with that.
And it's not just the black and white issue, as we discovered today.
And we have had meetings upon meetings. We step through every single detail of the shipment. Every single detail we go through, from the time they depart China, the journey here, the time they hit the airport and they come to the zoo, and then even their first time here at the zoo. We walk through every single bit of what it looks like from an animal care perspective, from a security perspective, from a permitting perspective, from anything you can imagine. And we're actually, FedEx is donating the flight, and they've been fantastic partners. They know how to move things, and so they've been great partners for us in terms of working. We sit down with them and talk about the logistics of the shipment.
Later in our discussion, Dr. Smith explained that the total cost of housing the pandas at the zoo was around $2.8 million per year, including the $1 million conservation fee that goes to the zoo's counterparts in China.
$1 million, and we call it, it's a conservation fee, and all of that money goes to the conservation of giant pandas in the wild. You can't transport animals, endangered species, across international borders for commercial purposes. So it's actually, it's really great because it's the incentive for conservation. And I also love that because, people come to the zoo, they support the panda program, they buy, panda t-shirts or stuffed pandas. That money goes directly to support giant panda conservation in the wild, which is pretty cool.
Without a doubt, the pandas are one of the most popular exhibits at the zoo.
The National Zoo's press release called giant pandas icons of Washington, D.C., and you really don't hear about that for lions or orangutans or any other animals. But how popular are the pandas relative to the other exhibits?
We know that when people come here, the majority of them do want to see pandas. They come here, they see other animals, they see the lions, the tigers, the orangutans. People really love snakes around here too. But we do know that when they come here, they want to see pandas. And I think it's because, they're rare. They're not a lot of places they're adorable. I think that's the first thing. Yeah. They're rare. There aren't a lot of places where people can see them. But I also think it's an optimistic story. People come here. It's a story of happiness. It's a story of collaboration, cooperation, survival, success. And people who visit are part of that success. They come here, they see the pandas, they support the zoo. That money goes straight to panda conservation. So not only do they hear about the success, but they are part of it.
And with that, we stepped out of Director Smith's office after a quick visit to the small mammal exhibit and another stop at the new birdhouse, both of which uncharacteristically had no lines. We were still left wondering when exactly the pandas would be back. Then on October 14th,
3-year-old giant pandas Bao Li and Qing Bao are set to arrive at Dulles International Airport very soon.
We got that tip that the pandas were going to leave today, but we had to find a way to track the Panda Express, as it were. This is the FedEx plane that we discovered that was the only FedEx plane leaving Chengdu, China, which is right near the Panda
FedEx's Panda Express Trans-Pacific flight this morning, 3-year-old Bao Li and Qing Bao. En route to Washington, D.C.
After a brief stop in Alaska, news outlets confirmed that the pandas were in the air on their way to Washington. They would arrive on October 15th.
They made that long journey across the Pacific Ocean, landed here in Dulles just a few minutes ago. So you are looking live right now at the Panda.
Saw the plane from a distance. A lot of us out here, the journalists, the photographers, were looking and we're like, I think that's it. I think that's it. And of course, as the plane...
A buzz of excitement today in Washington, D.C., not over the presidential election, but pandas.
Panda-marked FedEx trucks pulling into the National Zoo. We now know that our 2 new giant pandas, they are here in D.C. They have arrived. What an exciting day to have here, Qing Bao and Bao Li, for us here the next 10 years.
So the pandas are finally here. All day on the 15th, we were scrambling to figure out when exactly they would be open to the public. An RFA story published that day said that there would be a 30-day quarantine period, and then they would make their debut after that. Later that day, a pink banner appeared on the National Zoo's website saying that members of the zoo would get a special preview of Bao Li and Qing Bao, and then their public debut would be on January 24th.
Bao Li and Qing Bao are signed on to be a fixture at the National Zoo until 2034. So if you're in DC and want to catch a glimpse, just reserve a free entry pass and hike on over to the panda exhibit. Be prepared to wait in line if it's the weekend. According to Brandie Smith, your visit will help conserve not only pandas, but all the animals in general. She explained this to the media last November.
The reason the zoo is so important because it's an opportunity for people to see animals in person, right? Not to see a video, but to see them live, to hear them, to smell them, to get that whole experience. And so people won't conserve what they don't care about. People have to care to conserve. People coming here, seeing our pandas, buying a panda t-shirt or a panda plushie means that they are actively part of our success story.
You're listening to the RFA Insider podcast, made by two real-life staffers at Radio Free Asia.
If you'd like to send us feedback, there are many ways you can do this.
You can send us an email at insider@rfa.org.
You can comment on our webpage at rfa.org/English/insider. Just click on the episode you're listening to and write your comment below.
Or you can send us a tweet at RFA Insider or visit us in person.
No, don't visit us in person.
Right, don't visit us in person. But anyway, we really want to hear from you.
So tune in every other Friday and we'll take you behind the scenes.
And tell you what the news really means here at RFA Insider. Okay, so the pandas are now here in Washington. And let me just tell you that documentary was really fun to create.
Yeah, for sure. Being like on the scene and talking with people who didn't actually realize that they were gone was surprising.
And let me just tell you, you sounded really great in there. Your voiceovers were done very expertly.
Oh, thank you very much.
So even though we haven't done them yet. But anyway, we will do that after we're done recording this part of the episode. And of course, we learned that the pandas will debut to the public on January 24th. And we here at RFA Insider, we're on the invite list for a media event that might occur prior to that day. But until we know more, I can't elaborate any more about that. However, this is the section of the podcast where we always get into
Podcast Free Asia. Today, we're going to do something a little different on Podcast Free Asia, which is highlighting one of the more trending topics at the moment. And that is a development in Russia's war with Ukraine. Well, this week, Jae-woo Park and Hae-jun Seo from RFA Korean made a video of their conversation about this development, and we'd like to play a little bit of that for you right now.
For a little bit of context, North Korea and Russia have been getting closer to each other since the start of Russia's war with Ukraine. And at that time, Russia was becoming more isolated in the international community because of the war. And it's almost like it had nowhere to turn but to North Korea, which is also isolated for its own laundry list of reasons, the biggest being its nuclear program. But last year, there was concern that North Korean weaponry was being used by Russian soldiers in the war with Ukraine because that would violate sanctions. But now the news has dropped that North Korea is sending troops. So let's hear a bit of RFA Korean's conversation and see why this is a big deal.
So if I had told you 3 years ago, North Korea troops would be sending to Russia, what would you say?
I would say you're totally insane.
And now?
With the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the end of the post-Cold War era, I think it's something plausible. And in fact, it's actually happening.
Yeah, as we continue to look at this, there is evidence that there are DPRK troops in Russia.
Did you think their involvement could change the outcome of the war?
I don't think so. In modern warfare, there's two things matter. Technology and adaptability. So they're likely way behind on military tools and technology. So what we're seeing in Ukraine war is like modern guerrilla warfare. Small unit using cheap drones, and you see the Jacqueline missiles, anti-tank missile. I don't think North Korea can do anything in there. The only thing they're good at it is sending the trash balloon. So not fighting the tech-driven wars.
So what do you think North Korea's actual motive is for sending these troops to Russia?
To gain combat experience.
So the other voice you heard in there was a clip they inserted of U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who was saying that, yes, there is in fact evidence that North Korean soldiers are there in Russia.
Okay, interesting. My first thought watching this is, how would the soldiers communicate with each other?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess they would send all the Korean troops as a single unit, because not every North Korean soldier would speak Russian.
True,
obviously.
or like have to interface.
Yeah, so maybe the commander or somebody, there'll be interpreters and they'll be under a joint command or something. But that's if they're specifically in combat. You remember that Joe said they're there to gain combat experience.
Right.
But, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to throw them in on the front lines, and something like that could be disastrous. But to his point, though, the reason they're doing this is in some ways related to manpower issues faced by Russia, because they do need more soldiers to fight in Ukraine, and using North Korean soldiers would be a way to do that. However, right now at present, I think the numbers are very low, somewhere in the thousands.
Okay.
There are plans eventually to ramp it up to 10,000, but as you can see, like if they're going to rely primarily on massive numbers of North Koreans to fight the war, that means the war is probably not going that well. So I can't really see that it would be like this major North Korean force, right?
Right.
Another thing we did cover in English about this was that Russia's going to pay $2,000 per month for every North Korean soldier that is on the ground.
Whoa, not bad.
And, that's more than generals make in North Korea. So it's you'd think that that's a huge payday, but just like all overseas workers, unfortunately, that means probably the government's going to take the lion's share of their salaries to support the regime or to support Kim Jong-un's slush funds. And here they are risking their lives. That's kind of not a good deal after all.
Yeah, I'd be curious, I guess, depending on how much they get to keep for themselves. Like how exciting this opportunity would be to North Korean
you could correlate that with in South Korea during the Vietnam War. South Korean soldiers could volunteer to be sent to Vietnam, and then they would get I don't know the exact rate, but
so
it was a transformative amount of money that they would get paid if they went to fight in Vietnam and survived. So, but let's end Podcast Free Asia here, and we'll get into the rundown.
The rundown.
All right, Amy, so I'd like to start out the rundown with a question for you about Japanese packaged foods. How would you say that Japanese packaged foods compare to those sold here in the U.S.?
I think that's such a broad question.
Is it?
The thing that struck me the most, I think, about packaged food in Japan is that it's more like single-person friendly compared to packaged food in America, which is more like family size.
Single person friendly. Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So like in Japan, you can buy like a whole loaf of sliced bread, but you can also buy like half a loaf of bread. Or like you can buy a single ice cream bar or like a single cup of ice cream compared to like a box of 4 here.
Well, I think, though, that, like, Trader Joe's is kind of doing the same thing, Like, it seems like they're selling to people who live in small apartments by themselves.
But that's why Trader Joe's is smashing it in America, because it's the only one doing that,
Okay,
right?
yeah. Okay, and what are some of the characteristics that you notice when you get your hands on some of these products made in Japan?
I want to say that the packaging is more intentional. Like, the onigiri, and, like, when you, like, open it, the plastic separates the seaweed from the rice so it, like, doesn't get soggy. But, like, I don't know if it's also fair to judge it that way, because obviously I pay attention because I've not experienced this kind of, like, packaging before. But, yeah, it's like the packaging is way more beautiful and, like, excessive.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, I always find that the packaged food from Japan tends to be a little bit of higher quality, I think.
Like taste-wise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it has better quality. I think the Japanese products in general have better quality control, I think. And so, for example, but we're talking just snack foods here. If you buy a pack of Oreos in the U.S., it's not uncommon that some of them might be broken or possibly even crushed. But if you were to get some Japanese cookies, well, they'd be like individually wrapped, as you said, that's something I both love and hate. I love it because like that means it has a longer shelf life, right?
That's true.
And you don't open it and say, well, I already opened it, so I have to, even though I only want 2, I got to eat all 6 of them because the other 4 are going to go bad, right? But at the same time, that's pretty bad for the environment that you got to, you open the big package and then you open the small package and get your one cookie out.
Yeah, if I'm buying a bag of rice crackers, I'm eating the whole bag of individually packaged rice crackers.
Okay. But even so, the way that works, it makes it so that the way it looks and tastes is just a step above, if you know what I mean. And I think the same thing is true for things like soy sauce.
Is there a difference?
Yeah, there is. I think there is. So when I go to Asian markets to go buy soy sauce, I go to the soy sauce aisle. Yes, there's a whole aisle for this. The first thing I'll do is look for the expiration date, of course, because...
While reading the script, I was like, does soy sauce expire?
No, it does, but because some people, they don't use it fast enough. And actually, I refrigerate mine, so it doesn't expire that much. But I use it often enough that that's never been an issue. But sometimes I'll go in there and see that they haven't, they've left it on the shelf for so long because it's like a not popular brand or something. And so the expiration date lapses and they haven't taken it off the shelf yet. Second is country of origin. That's really important to me. So probably the most well-known maker of Japanese soy sauce is, what do you think?
Kikkoman.
Kikkoman.
Show me, show you. Kikkoman, Kikkoman.
I do like that brand, but in the U.S., most Kikkoman soy sauce you can find on store shelves, at least around here. It's brewed in Wisconsin.
I'd not paid attention to that.
So I actually look for the bottles with Japanese writing on the front and check to make sure it's from Kikkoman in Japan, right? Because there's a taste difference.
Is there?
I think there is. There is. If you can't find the Japanese Kikkoman, then I go for a brand called Yamasa, which is also made only in Japan. So some people think I'm crazy, but yes, it does taste different. And whether that's a placebo or an actual difference, I'm not totally sure.
I feel like we need to have a soy sauce taste test in the studio.
But like, have you ever been to like the hole-in-the-wall Chinese American Chinese restaurant with those little packets?
Yeah.
Of that stuff that purports to be soy sauce, but it's like...
It has like the caramel flavor.
It's just like,
color.
Look at the ingredients, water, salt, and I don't know. It's just, I never thought that was soy sauce, right?
Yeah. But like, that's quality difference. You're talking country difference.
Right. But I'm saying that the Japanese one is of higher quality, in my opinion. And it tastes better. It's more consistent, I should say.
Do you buy the soy sauce bottles that are like, that the soy sauce is like protected from the air, that you have to squeeze to like get the soy sauce out?
No, actually,
so it like, doesn't oxidize.
I have not bought that. No, this one comes when like it's a little pet bottle, I guess, and it's kind of ribbed.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. The other one, the American one, you can get at Costco. It's like this giant jug of it, and I don't think you could ever use it that fast. So it must be for like restaurants or something.
My family buys that.
Well, if they are buying that Kikkoman one in Costco, then that's made in Wisconsin, and it tastes different in my opinion.
Okay.
But in China anyway, the reason we're talking about Japanese foods, there's a milk powder company called Feihe, which is under fire for engaging in business with the Japanese company.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the Little Pinks, do you remember who the Little Pinks are?
Yes, they're kind of like, they're just like the super nationalists.
Super nationalists. So pro-communist party supporters. They're calling for a boycott of Feihe because it signed a letter of intent to develop a lactoferrin-based infant formula product with Japan's Kyowa Hakko Biochemical. I don't know what lactoferrin is, but
that was going to be my question.
They're making baby powder. Lacto has something to do with milk.
So the Little Pinks dislike this.
Yeah, they say you shouldn't be working with a Japanese company.
Interesting.
But
that's so interesting because China has had lots of infant formula contamination issues.
Indeed it has.
And people have then gone outside the country to purchase formula.
That is true, but this story's not really about milk, I think. Okay. So Feihe actually had to issue a statement. They didn't deny that they were collaborating with this company, but they denied claims that they would import any raw materials for the products from Japan. So that's the kicker. They were saying you're like
supporting domestic industries.
Right. So here's the statement. It says, the statement is untrue and has seriously affected our brand's reputation. Feihe, as a representative of Chinese national enterprises, shares the same patriotic sentiments as our consumers. And it also warned of possible legal action if social media comments continue to damage the brand, which I guess in China you can do that, right?
I have no idea. Can you?
Maybe. I know that in some countries, South Korea, for instance, if you were to go to a restaurant and give it a bad review, the owner can actually seek legal action because they could claim like libel or slander.
Oh, so it's much looser interpretation.
Yeah, they could say that you're negatively affecting my business with your untrue claims, and then they'd have to prove that what you said was not true. But
I see.
In this, I don't know anything about Chinese law, so maybe Chinese legal system allows you to do this by maybe it's a libel or slander thing on social media, but I'm not sure. But here are some of the comments. A social media user in Guangdong said, there are so many countries with advanced dairy products and technology, so why did you choose Japan? I can think of a million reasons why you would. It's like right next door.
Yeah.
high quality products from all the dairies in Hokkaido, which is pretty
right.
good.
It has like a reputation.
Okay, another one in Jiangsu said, consumers are patriotic and we're not stupid.
Oh.
Well, I mean, that's subjective, I suppose. And then finally, another one from Gansu said, nothing good will come from cooperating with Japan. And then somebody replied to that comment saying, best not to have any dealings with them. They have evil intentions and we must be on guard.
Wow.
So as I said before, this story is about way more than just milk. It's about rampant anti-Japanese sentiment. And so that is where I would like to take this discussion. If you look at like tourism, for example, you'll see that millions of Chinese tourists travel to Japan every year. So it's clear that the people at least want to visit Japan.
For sure.
But a lot of media outlets will characterize that this is part of, quote unquote, the latest wave of anti-Japanese sentiment. Mm-hmm. And the RFA report that I'm referring to says this is the latest wave after the Fukushima nuclear plant released treated wastewater into the ocean in 2023. So there are a lot of health concerns about that.
Mm-hmm.
So if they release contaminated water, this is treated water now, reportedly it's safe. But if it was contaminated, then that would cause like environmental problems and also possibly cause issues with seafood, for example.
Right.
So there was a lot of backlash against that, like you're making everything unsafe or you're releasing all this radiation into the environment. But the thing I found about stories that contain an anti-Japanese sentiment angle, they'll list all the recent episodes but neglect to include the necessary historical contexts, such as, China and Japan having fought 2 major wars with each other in the last century and ending up on opposite sides of the Cold War.
Right.
Either they take it for granted that you already know that, or they just don't think it's important information. So if you frame it without that, then what happens is that people think, well, these people are being irrational and they're hating Japan for no reason. But
well, in the case of the milk, maybe a little bit. But
yeah. But I mean, I'm not saying that they're right to be anti-Japanese, but I'm also not saying that they have absolutely no reason at all.
Right. Like it comes from somewhere.
Yeah. And then furthermore, there are also those who believe that the Chinese government, if it wants to distract people from domestic issues, they will drum up anti-Japan sentiment. And, we've observed that in some other countries as well, that sometimes if like a politician is not doing well politically, they'll start leaning into the anti-Japan stuff and it'll boost their numbers a little bit. And then in Japan also, occasionally, if they want to, if there's like really right-wing politicians and they want to drum up support with their base, they'll like go visit the Yasukuni Shrine, which is very, very controversial in both China and Korea. And they'll say things like service themselves.
Why is it controversial, Eugene?
Well, why is Yasukuni Shrine controversial? Oh, because it houses all of Japan's war dead, or it's a shrine built to them, and that includes people who have been convicted of war crimes. So,
I see.
Yes, so that's why it's controversial. But anyway, in a previous RFA report, Yang Hayang, who is a professor at Shizuoka University in Japan, said that anti-Japanese sentiment was Chinese government policy, and saying that without it, the Chinese Communist Party loses its legitimacy. So I just wanted to say that, as we said before, this is not about wastewater and it's not about milk. The previous story we were talking about these drinks that were secretly Japanese because they had red caps or something like that. There's a lot more to it than that. You have to understand the total historical context and realize that it's coming from, like as you said, it's coming from somewhere. But at the same time, it's not totally irrational, but in some ways it kind of is. Because as you said, also that it's just milk. I mean,
or what? It's a
collaboration.
It's a lactoferrin-based infant formula product.
Yes, exactly. But what do you have for us today?
So, Eugene, in honor of Halloween next week, I have to ask, what kinds of costumes did you wear as a kid?
Okay, well, Halloween was actually one of my favorite holidays. Actually, probably my favorite holiday.
I can tell.
Next to Christmas. Yeah.
Okay.
So, from the age of about 4 to 12, I would take my Halloween costumes very seriously. And they used to sell these costumes that came with a plastic smock and a mask and a rubber band behind it. I think it was called Ben Cooper. Do you remember those? No, you probably don't. Right?
That's the brand of the costume?
Yes. It came in this little cardboard box and it had a mask, usually with a licensed figure like He-Man or G.I. Joe. And then like this plastic onesie that you could wear. Basically, like the Barbie costume would have Barbie's face and then it would be like a plastic onesie. And on the front would also be like the Barbie logo and like maybe her face or something, right?
No, I've never seen this before.
Okay, well, that's what lazy parents used to buy their kids back in the 80s. I admittedly did have a few of these. I had a Cabbage Patch one back when that was the thing.
That's cute.
But in most years, I wanted to specifically make it myself so I didn't look like all the other kids in their stupid one-time use costumes. So my most memorable ones, and while I was writing this out, I was actually thinking like, there's a generation gap between us, so you might not even be aware of what some of these are. So I'm going to stop every time I think and ask you if you know what it is.
Okay.
All right. So the first one was Mr. Yuck.
No.
You have no idea
who
Mr. Okay, Mr. Yuck is. He was the mascot of the Poison Control Center back in the 1970s
Of
and
America?
80s. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, specifically somewhere in Pennsylvania, but it was a nationwide campaign, complete with this very, very scary commercial that was meant to scare kids into not drinking poisons or not touching things they're not supposed to. So Mr. Yuck is a face, it's a green frowning face, like a smiley face, except for it's green and frowning, and he's sticking his tongue out like he's really angry. And you'd stick it on like bleach and like household cleaners and stuff, and then the kids would know that they shouldn't touch that. And it had this really creepy song, which I'm going to play right now.
Mr. Yuck is me. Mr. Yuck is green.
I was terrified of it. Seriously.
Mr. Yuck.
Yes. And so one year I wanted to be Mr. Yuck for Halloween, and my mom was kind enough to make me a Mr. Yuck costume. This is when I was really little.
That's pretty cute.
The second one, Link, the main character from The Legend of Zelda.
Yes, I do know who Link is.
Okay. Because they're still making those games now.
Yes.
So this required that I purchased some green fabric and sew my own costume.
You made it?
Yes, I did.
Whoa.
And I creatively used moon boots to complete the costume. Do you know what moon boots are?
Boots are those really chunky snow boots.
Oh, yay. I'm impressed.
My housemate had a pair.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess they did make a comeback kind of recently. But yes, back in the 80s, moon boots are an actual brand, and so these were knockoff moon boots. You know?
Oh, I was going to say, you bought a pair of moon boots just for your
No.
costume?
I had some boots that were in the moon boot style.
Okay.
And that was the style back in the 80s. And so, Link from The Legend of Zelda, of course, doesn't wear moon boots, but, I had to just work with what I had. And, it comes up to the knee. And so all you have to do is just kind of like...
You had knee-high moon boots?
Well, okay, maybe between the knee and the ankle.
Okay.
I'm pointing to like my calf, I guess. But yes, they were longer boots and they were comfortable and you could walk around and do trick-or-treating in them. The third one, I was a Ghostbuster. Are you familiar with the Ghostbusters?
By name, yes.
By name, yes. Okay, well, it was a movie, of course, from the 1980s, and it was all the rage.
I feel like we need also the 80s soundtrack right here, as you describe your
from the pen. Okay, yeah, sure. I'll stick it in then. Okay. I had a snowsuit that I used for the main costume, and then the big thing was making the proton pack, which you probably don't know what that is either. No. The proton pack is this gigantic nuclear backpack that they would use, and then they'd shoot, I guess, rays of nuclear energy at ghosts in order to capture them.
That's so 80s.
Okay. And so the way I made it is that I kind of cut some holes in a cardboard box and laced my backpack straps through them. And then on the other side, I painted the box, and then I added all this tech waste to it, like, discarded CDs and random gears, and I dissected an old phone and took out all the circuit parts and everything. I tried to make it look all techy and everything. There was even this little button that I had on there that said Death Ray on it, which it was pretty cool. It took me a long time to do that. And also because being slimed is a thing in Ghostbusters. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Okay, so ghosts in Ghostbusters apparently are made of something called ectoplasm, right?
Okay.
And when they phase through solid matter, they leave behind a slime residue. And so it was a thing for the Ghostbusters. If they'd encountered ghosts, they'd be like, oh, I've been slimed. And they'd be covered from head to toe in this...
Because the ghosts would pass through them.
Yes. And so they'd have all this, slimy goop all over them. So I had to buy a specific hair gel because it was green. And I had to just stick all this disgusting hair gel in my face and my hair because it was green and goopy. But then, it would dry after a while. And so as I was trick-or-treating, I had the hair gel with me. in my little candy pouch, and I would have to reapply the hair gel to make it look slimy.
You're so dedicated.
Yes, and then when people would say, "Hey, what are you? You're a spaceman, aren't you?" And I'm like, "No, I'm a Ghostbuster. Can't you tell from the obvious logo, the Ghostbusters logo on my arm? Come on, don't you watch anything?" No, it was kind of disappointing when people would misidentify me because I put a lot of effort into that one. But I think after the age of 12, I just started kind of phoning it in.
Yeah.
Like, well, I'll just use the previous costume from the previous year. Why don't I see what's around my house? And one year I went as Michael Jackson, which I just put on a white glove and walked around.
That works.
And that was it, you know?
Did you moonwalk?
I could moonwalk, but I didn't moonwalk because you can't moonwalk on sidewalks very well.
Okay.
But nobody knew what I was anyway, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. What about you? What kind of costumes did you wear?
Halloween was not a big holiday for me. Or I guess my family did not really understand Halloween being like immigrants. I remember one Halloween, my mom forbade my sister and I from saying trick or treat because she thought it was really rude or like unchristian.
Really? Yeah.
So we had to say Happy Halloween when people opened the
it's funny
doors.
that you say that. I grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly Jewish because we were situated between 3 different synagogues. And so we'd go to some houses and there'd be very Orthodox people and we'd be trick-or-treating like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't celebrate Christian holidays here." So to them, they thought Halloween was a Christian holiday. And,
interesting.
And to your parents, I guess, they thought
very pagan holiday.
It is very pagan. Yeah. That's the truth. But I mean, it's not anti-Christian to participate in. Halloween is actually like the one night that most American kids get the most exercise the whole year because they walk around the entire neighborhood.
Wow, we should implement more Halloweens.
Well, no, because it's still a net positive in calories because
True.
They're engorging themselves on candy after they're done. But, yeah, go on. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I also phoned it in a lot. Well, like, as a kid, I was like normal costumes like Snow White or like the Pink Power Ranger.
Ooh.
But then like when I had to start making my own.
Wait a second. The Pink Power Ranger?
I mean, I only was the Pink Power Ranger because it was pink.
Okay, but it was like a full costume and complete with a complete mask?
Like the kind you buy at Party City.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. So did it have like the back, was it like the full helmet or is it just the front?
I think it was a mask that you like snapped on.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like that Ben Cooper onesie I was talking about then.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when I like started making my own, I just remember being Nick Jonas of the Jonas Brothers.
That's cool.
Which just involved like a polo, skinny jeans, a skinny tie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did people know who you were though?
No, they were like, "Who are you?"
Okay. Well, I mean, that's pretty cool. Nick Jonas. Did the Jonas Brothers do like a tour with the Wonder Girls maybe when they were in the U.S.?
Maybe.
Okay.
Is that your point of reference?
Yes, because I was living in Korea when the Jonas Brothers got big, so I don't know anything about them. So.
All right.
Yeah.
So my follow-up question is, are you going trick-or-treating this year?
Of course. I have a child, and I just want to tell you that if you are in D.C., and you want to do trick-or-treating, Georgetown is the place to go.
That does not surprise me.
Yeah, so I used to live in Georgetown, and let me tell you, on Halloween night, we're not talking about those little tiny fun-sized candy bars. They give you the huge full-size ones, so your little tiny bucket's not going to be enough. You need to get a wagon because you're going to get, the full-size Snickers bar and the full-size Three Musketeers, and they have this weird thing where they'll shoot it out of weird cannons.
They'll shoot it?
Well, okay, so it's like... during the COVID-19 pandemic, it was like a thing where you didn't want to touch other people, right? So there was one house that set up this gigantic, like, dragon that you would load the candies from the second floor of the house, and they would come out of his mouth and slide down to the trick-or-treater, right?
That would be very thrilling as a kid.
Yeah, it was awesome. And it's like the side of the slide is like painted to look like fire, so it's like he's breathing the fire at you, and then it even had like light out. It was really amazing. It had a smoke machine and everything, so that was a popular house. But then they give you this full-size candy bar, so really
a
awesome.
dragon slides you a
two-story
full-size candy bar.
Yes, a 2-story dragon that slides you a full-size candy bar, and all the kids were like, "Oh, me next!" It was awesome. It was awesome. So good.
So I ask all these questions because in Shanghai, Halloween is being shut down this year.
No.
So a police notice that was issued to neighborhood communities in the Huangpu district of Shanghai ended up getting leaked online, and it's a pretty big downer.
Yeah.
So according to the notice, all costumes and Halloween makeup are banned. and police officers are encouraged to take, quote, compulsory measures in the event of non-cooperation.
That doesn't sound... First of all, though, I have to ask,
Mm.
was Halloween a thing in Shanghai already?
It was, so we'll get into that.
Okay,
But
sorry.
the notice goes on to ban buildings in the district from displaying any Halloween decorations.
Come on.
So that includes like bats, pumpkins, ghosts, coffins, skeletons. And on top of that, no, quote, horror or violence-related elements either. So even stricter, Halloween-related terms and the English language in general are both banned from businesses' promotional material, both online and offline.
English language in general?
Yes, no English.
What are you going to do if it's like McDonald's?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, they're going to have to write... Oh, I guess they could just write it in characters, but still.
So the notice advised businesses to run their holiday plans by authorities in advance to avoid trouble. But like, what kind of holiday plans can you make if you can't even mention the holiday?
Yeah, that's true. You can't call it Halloween. Can you just call it like
Fall festival.
Scary, spooky day? No, you can't.
No, you can't.
Yeah, so yeah, it would be like Pumpkin Day or something, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
so you asked, or yeah, you're wondering probably what authorities in Shanghai have against Halloween.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like this at all last year. So the streets were full of young people in like going super out in Halloween costumes.
Mhm.
But it seems that officials took issue with what some people went as last year.
Oh, I can see where this is going. Some people probably dressed up as Winnie the Pooh.
Yes.
Is it? Okay. All right.
Correct.
All right.
So if you remember, last year was also the time when the white paper protests were sweeping China.
Mhm.
And this was when young people started gathering on the streets to protest the country's strict zero COVID policy.
Okay, yes.
And that came about after an apartment fire in Xinjiang killed 10 people.
Yeah.
And there was speculation at that time that residents had been locked in their homes, which was one of the COVID control tactics used by authorities. And also that fire trucks had been stalled by pandemic control barriers. So
Fire
basically,
trucks had been... they'd been stalled. I
yeah,
thought you
there
said
was a video of like a fire truck spraying water at the apartment, and it was like not within reach. So people
Okay.
were like, oh, it couldn't get closer because of COVID controls.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically frustration boiled over and people started directly challenging the CCP very loudly and directly.
Mhm.
And that defiance carried over to Halloween, where some went as China's COVID-19 enforcers. So they were like full on in white hazmat suits and like brandishing the testing swabs.
I see.
And then others, like you mentioned, dressed up as Winnie the Pooh, who Xi Jinping is famously and mockingly compared to.
All right, so I think maybe some of our listeners might not be aware of the connection between Winnie the Pooh and Xi Jinping. Like,
Okay.
Xi Jinping is the president of China.
Yes.
Winnie the Pooh is the yellow bear who likes to eat honey.
Mhm.
What's the big deal?
Maybe I think it came about during Barack Obama's presidency.
Okay, so a long
correct me
time
if I'm
ago.
wrong, please.
We'll fact check. Yeah.
There were photos of Barack Obama and Xi Jinping meeting, and people compared Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh, just like a little dopey, a little droopy, and
Okay.
then Barack Obama resembled Eeyore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, but see, like, what's the big deal? Like, Winnie the Pooh's a cute, popular character, and
I guess not if you're a very serious leader of
I guess, but I
a
mean,
large country.
I wonder if like people just don't like that they're comparing the leader to Winnie the Pooh, or if Xi Jinping himself really hates the comparison. And
No, I think he hates the comparison.
okay, all right,
Which makes it worse because then you give the comparison power.
right, exactly.
Yeah, so I guess in the past, Halloween seemed to offer more freedom of expression in China, or at least opportunity to take shots at the government.
I see.
Kind of like underhandedly, under the excuse of celebrating a holiday. So it seems that authorities don't want to let that tradition carry on this year.
Or at least in Shanghai, anyway.
Yes.
But I wonder if, like, I mean, there's obviously like American consulates and embassies there. I'm sure they'll have their own Halloween celebrations there, and
Yeah.
maybe they won't be very political in their decorations or anything. But I think this is extreme because you got to let people do what they want to do to celebrate whatever holidays they want, right?
Yeah. I mean, by, clamping down more, you're just feeding into the dissatisfaction or
You could
defiance.
imagine the furor here if they said, like, no Christmas trees this year.
Yeah.
People would be up in arms. But anyway, on that note, we here at RFA Insider would like to wish everyone a happy Halloween. And this now brings us to the end of this episode. For Amy Lee, I'm Eugene Huang, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Like what you heard today? It would really mean a lot to us if you would like, subscribe, or follow this podcast. You can also share it on social media or even text messages. Feeling frisky? Give us a rating on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or elsewhere. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you here for the next episode of RFA Insider. You sure? Yeah. All right.